As Sarah cradled the baby in her arms, a lion's golden eyes met hers, filled with unspoken understanding. The world outside the hospital seemed to disappear as an ancient connection surged within her. In that moment, she realized the truth. The lion had brought this child to her for a reason, and her life, once ordinary, was now bound to a destiny greater than anything she could have imagined. With every heartbeat, Sarah knew she wasn't just holding a baby. She was holding the key to a fragile peace between two worlds, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. It was an ordinary day at Meadowbrook Hospital, or so it seemed. The fluorescent lights above hummed in their usual monotonous rhythm, and the soft rustling of papers in the nursing station mixed with the distant beeping of machines. The hospital was a well-oiled machine, every staff member moving in synchronized patterns, their tasks as predictable as the passing hours. Nurse Sarah Walters had just finished checking on her patients when a strange noise broke the usual hum of the hospital. It was a low, rumbling growl, deep and resonant, like a distant thunderstorm approaching. Confused, Sarah lifted her gaze from the clipboard she was holding. The sound came again, louder this time, echoing through the narrow hallways. It wasn't the usual sounds of medical equipment malfunctioning or patients in distress. It was a growl, unmistakable and primal. Sarah's curiosity piqued, and she set the clipboard aside, stepping out of the nurse's station to investigate. She walked down the corridor, her shoes clicking softly against the polished tile floor. What she saw next was beyond anything she could have imagined. At the far end of the hallway, standing as if it belonged there, was a lion. The creature was magnificent. Its mane, a golden halo of wild beauty, framed a face that was both regal and untamed. Its muscles rippled under the thick fur, and its amber eyes shone with an intensity that seemed to carry an ancient wisdom. For a moment, Sarah froze, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. A lion, an actual lion, was standing in the middle of a hospital hallway. It wasn't roaring, nor was it showing any signs of aggression. It was simply there, poised and calm, as though it belonged.
The nurses, doctors, and patients who were close by reacted similarly, staring in stunned disbelief. No one moved, no one spoke. The hospital, usually bustling with activity, felt eerily silent. Sarah felt her heart race as her mind tried to process the surreal scene unfolding before her eyes. A lion in a hospital? How was this possible? The lion's amber gaze met Sarah's, locking onto her with a quiet, almost knowing intensity. It stood still for a moment, unblinking, as if assessing her. Then, with an unexpected delicacy, it lowered its head and gently took something into its mouth. As it drew closer, Sarah saw what it was, a small bundle wrapped in a simple cloth, no larger than a newborn child. Her breath caught in her throat as the lion approached her, its movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't the menacing presence Sarah would have expected from such a creature. No, this lion seemed calm, purposeful even, as if it had a task to complete. The lion stopped in front of her, its amber eyes never leaving hers. Sarah stood motionless, unsure what to do. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. The lion held the bundle in its mouth for a moment longer. Then, as if understanding exactly what was needed, it gently placed the cloth-wrapped bundle into Sarah's arms. For a long, timeless moment, Sarah stood there, her hands shaking as she cradled the baby in her arms. The weight of the infant was light, almost unreal, and the soft, warm bundle of cloth felt strangely comforting against her chest. The lion, its task complete, sat back on its haunches, watching her with an unwavering gaze. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Was she dreaming? This couldn't be happening, could it? The soft coo of the baby in her arms brought her back to the present, the small sound cutting through the thick fog of confusion in her mind. The baby, a tiny, fragile thing, shifted in her arms and opened its eyes, bright, innocent eyes that seemed to shimmer with an intelligence far beyond its years. The baby's gaze locked with Sarah's, and for a moment, it felt as though the world around her had disappeared. The noise of the hospital, the distant conversations, the hurried footsteps, everything faded into the background. All that remained was a lion, sitting with quiet dignity, and the baby, whose gaze held a depth Sarah couldn't explain. The lion's presence was unyielding, as though it were waiting for Sarah to do something, to act, to understand, to accept. The hospital staff, still paralyzed by disbelief, slowly began to stir, whispering amongst themselves. Some took tentative steps forward, others hung back, unsure whether to approach the nurse or retreat to safety. No one dared make a move toward the lion. It seemed an ancient, untouchable force in their midst, too powerful to be questioned. The baby in Sarah's arms shifted again, its tiny fingers curling instinctively around her thumb, and Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness. A primal instinct she hadn't known she possessed seemed to awaken within her. This child, this tiny, vulnerable creature, was somehow hers to protect, and in that moment, she felt more connected to the baby than she could have ever imagined. The lion, as though sensing Sarah's resolve, stood up and turned its head toward the hospital exit. It looked back at her once more, its amber eyes filled with something almost like approval. And then, just as quietly as it had arrived, the lion turned and padded toward the door. Its powerful muscles rippled with each step, but it made no sound. The door swung open, and without another glance, the lion disappeared into the night. Sarah stood there, frozen in place, the baby still cradled in her arms. The room had fallen silent again, the weight of what had just occurred settling heavily in the air. The staff, now gathering their courage, exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to say or do. It was Dr. Michaels, the head physician, who broke the silence. "Sarah, are you all right?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't know." She looked down at the baby in her arms, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. Why had the lion brought the baby to her? What did it all mean? And most of all, why had the lion chosen her? The baby cooed softly again, as if trying to reassure her. And in that moment, Sarah realized there was no turning back. Whatever had just happened, whatever the lion's visit signified, her life would never be the same again. The beginning of a strange and extraordinary journey had just begun. Despite the surreal nature of the situation, Sarah instinctively cradled the baby closer to her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small bundle, but it wasn't from fear. It was something deeper, an overwhelming, almost magnetic pull between herself and the tiny life she now held. The baby's warm breath, soft and steady, reassured her. The child was real, and so was the lion that had delivered it to her. The lion sat at her side, its massive form somehow filling the hallway, yet creating no sense of threat. It was a perfect contrast to the chaos that seemed to hang in the air. Despite the shock that still rattled Sarah's nerves, there was an unmistakable serenity that the lion exuded. Its amber eyes, deep and wise, looked up at her with an almost knowing expression, as if the creature was more than just an animal, as though it understood something she didn't yet grasp. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. The world around her seemed to slow as she carefully maneuvered her way down the hallway, feeling the eyes of the hospital staff on her. Nurses and doctors alike stood frozen, their gazes bouncing from the lion to the baby, unsure of how to act in the face of something so extraordinary. The lion followed her with a steady, composed gait, its presence calm and composed, as if it were simply another member of the hospital staff. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, but the animal seemed unaffected by it all. In fact, it almost seemed to radiate a quiet sense of authority. Sarah's heart pounded with each step she took toward the nursery, but it wasn't fear. It was a rush of questions, none of which had answers. How had the lion found its way here? Why had it brought the baby to her? And most perplexing of all, why did she feel this unexplainable connection to both the lion and the child? As she reached the nursery door, she hesitated for just a second. She was still trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Was this some kind of dream? A trick of the mind? She pushed the door open, taking one last glance at the lion. It remained just outside the window, sitting in a regal fashion, its golden mane almost glowing in the soft light of the hallway. Its eyes locked with hers again, filled with a depth of understanding that made her feel as though this moment had been destined. Inside the nursery, the usual hustle of the evening shift had stopped. Nurses, already attending to their rounds, paused as Sarah entered with the baby. The sight of the child in her arms was enough to draw their attention, but when they noticed the lion standing motionless just outside the window, their shock was palpable. The baby, oblivious of the commotion, cooed softly, its tiny hand curling around Sarah's finger. "Is it?" Nurse Jenny started to ask, but the words faltered as she glanced from the baby back to Sarah, then to the lion, standing as still as a statue outside. "I don't know what to make of this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the lion, it brought the baby to me." The room fell silent for a moment as the gravity of Sarah's words settled in. Dr. Michaels, who had followed her into the nursery, took a few cautious steps toward the lion's position at the window. His face was pale, but his usual calm professionalism quickly returned as he squared his shoulders and approached the animal. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured, his voice tinged with both awe and confusion. The lion's gaze didn't shift as Dr. Michaels moved closer, but the intensity in those amber eyes never wavered. The lion's presence was undeniable, and there was something almost calming about it. It was as though the animal's mere existence grounded everyone in the room, reminding them that in the midst of chaos, there could still be peace. Dr. Michaels glanced over at Sarah, his brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone gentle, but there was an edge of urgency. "This is unprecedented." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind still spinning. "I'm fine. I think I'm just trying to understand it all." She looked down at the baby again, marveling at how tiny it was, and yet how incredibly vital. The child's features were delicate, soft curls of dark hair, a button nose, and perfect little hands. There was nothing about it that stood out as abnormal, yet the circumstances surrounding the arrival of the child were anything but ordinary. Nurse Jenny approached Sarah and gently placed her hand on the baby's back, checking its temperature and breathing. "The baby seems perfectly healthy," she said after a moment. "No signs of distress, no abnormalities." She looked up at Sarah. "But how did it get here?" "I don't know," Sarah replied softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. She glanced back at the window, where the lion still sat, its golden mane catching the dim light from the hallway. "But the lion, it brought the baby to me." The other nurses began to gather around, their curiosity piqued despite their obvious apprehension. Some exchanged wary looks, while others, particularly those who had spent more time with Sarah, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. They could all feel it. The presence of the lion in the courtyard, the silent bond between it and Sarah, and the inexplicable connection to the baby she cradled. The room fell into a peaceful silence as the staff worked quietly around Sarah, checking the baby for any signs of injury, any signs of anything out of the ordinary. But there was nothing. The baby was perfect in every way. Not a single mark marred its skin, and it reacted to the nurse's gentle touches with the innocence only a newborn could possess. There was no sign of trauma, no indication of any strange circumstances beyond the obvious one. The fact that a lion had delivered the child to the hospital. As the baby rested peacefully in the crib, Sarah's gaze once again drifted to the window. The lion had not moved. It remained outside, its posture still regal, its eyes never leaving her. She could feel its watchful presence, almost as though it were waiting for something only she could understand. And in that moment, a strange thought struck her. The lion wasn't just guarding the baby. It was guarding her too. Her heart swelled with a strange sense of responsibility. The connection between them, the lion, the baby, and herself, was undeniable. She couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. But deep within her, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she was part of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. As the lion's presence continued to linger just outside, Sarah finally took a breath. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she felt something within her stir, a quiet, unspoken bond that had only just begun to take shape. The lion, once a creature of the wild, had become a guardian, and as Sarah stood there, watching over the baby, she felt an unspoken promise form in her heart. She wasn't alone in this. They were in this together. The beginning of something extraordinary had only just begun. The news of the lion's visit spread like wildfire throughout the hospital. It didn't take long for whispers to turn into rumors, and soon enough, the hospital was buzzing with curious onlookers. But as the day wore on, the mystery deepened. Staff members and patients alike were left with more questions than answers. How had the lion found its way to the hospital? What was its connection to the child it had brought? And, perhaps most intriguingly, why had it come to Sarah? By the time Sarah found herself alone with the baby again, the hallway outside the nursery had been cleared of the crowd of staff and media that had gathered. But the tension was still thick, hanging in the air. Through the small window in the nursery, Sarah could see the flashing lights of news vans, reporters clamoring for any information they could get. But no one inside the hospital knew what had happened or why it had happened. The mystery loomed large, unanswered. Sitting by the crib, Sarah cradled the baby in her arms. The little one had fallen into a peaceful sleep, the steady rise and fall of its tiny chest comforting to witness. Her mind, however, was far from calm. She kept running over the events in her head, trying to make sense of the lion's appearance, of the baby's strange arrival, and now, of what she had just noticed. She gently lifted the baby's tiny neck, where something gleamed softly in the dim light of the room. At first, it was so small she almost missed it. But now, the small necklace that adorned the baby's neck caught her eye, and she carefully traced its delicate chain with her fingers. The pendant was a small, beautifully crafted lion's paw, detailed and intricate, as though it held significance beyond the simple appearance of the animal. As Sarah held the pendant in her hand, she noticed that something was etched into the back of the piece, something she hadn't noticed earlier. Her fingers trembled as she turned the necklace over, her pulse quickening. The inscription was brief, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. For Sarah, her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't move. A flood of confusion, disbelief, and awe washed over her. The words were so simple, yet they carried an overwhelming weight. The necklace, the baby, the lion, they all seemed to be pointing to one impossible conclusion. This was no ordinary child. There was something more, something that connected Sarah to the infant in a way she couldn't understand. Why did the lion leave this for her? How did it know her name? The questions bombarded her all at once, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Sarah felt as if the room was closing in on her. The universe had shifted, and she was standing at the center of it all, with no clear path forward. Suddenly, the soft creak of the door broke her reverie. Dr. Michaels entered the room, his brow furrowed with concern. His calm demeanor had a slightly different edge to it now, a scent of urgency beneath the surface. Sarah, we've checked everything, he began, his voice measured but serious. We can't find anything. There's no record of this baby. No documentation, no files, nothing. It just appeared out of nowhere. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as Dr. Michaels continued, his eyes scanning the baby before looking back at her. I've had the staff double-check every bit of paperwork, he said, his words heavy with a sense of frustration. No birth certificate, no hospital records, no parents, nothing. It's as if this child didn't exist before today. Sarah blinked, trying to process his words, but before she could respond, Dr. Michaels continued, his expression growing even more grave. There's something else, he said quietly. We ran the baby's DNA through the system, and it's almost identical to yours. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. She stared at Dr. Michaels, her mind racing as his words settled in. Identical? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she were afraid to even ask the question aloud. What do you mean? Dr. Michaels looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. The baby's genetic makeup. It matches yours more closely than any other sample we have. We've never seen anything like it before. There's a perfect match on multiple levels, even on a molecular level. It's like your biological mother. Her hands clench around the baby's tiny fingers, the cold feeling of disbelief sinking into her bones. No, that couldn't be possible. She had never had children. She hadn't even been pregnant. Yet here she was, holding a baby with DNA almost identical to her own. This can't be right, Sarah whispered, shaking her head. I've never given birth to this child. I know, Dr. Michaels said, his voice gentle, but the science doesn't lie. We're still trying to figure out how this is even possible, but there's no mistake. The genetic material from this baby, it's almost like you. Almost, Sarah repeated, her voice rising in confusion. What do you mean by that? It's not exactly the same. Dr. Michaels hesitated for a moment, as though weighing his next words carefully. No, there are subtle differences. It's like you, but not entirely. There's something unique about it, something that doesn't quite fit with a human genome. We're going to need to run more tests, but right now, all we know is that the baby's genetic profile is almost identical to yours. The room seemed to spin. Sarah's world, already turned upside down by the arrival of the lion and the baby, now felt as though it were coming apart at the seams. How could this be happening? How could a baby with her DNA just appear out of nowhere? And what role did the lion play in all of this? Why had it come to her? She looked back down at the baby in her arms, her mind reeling. The soft weight of the child, the warmth of its body pressed against hers, seemed so real, so comforting. Yet the mystery surrounding it felt like an impenetrable fog, suffocating her thoughts. I don't understand, Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Dr. Michaels. How is any of this possible? Dr. Michaels sighed, running a hand through his hair. I wish I had answers for you, Sarah. But the truth is, we're in uncharted territory here. This is something no one could have predicted. I don't even know where to begin. But whatever this is, it's bigger than we realize. Sarah nodded numbly, her gaze still fixed on the baby. Her heart ached with a mixture of emotions, fear, confusion, and something deeper, something almost instinctual. There was a bond between them, a pull she couldn't explain. Despite the unanswered questions, despite the mystery, she knew one thing for certain. This child was hers to protect, and the lion had chosen her for a reason. As the hours passed, Sarah's mind raced. She could no longer dismiss the odd sense of familiarity that clung to her as she gazed at the baby in the crib. The mysterious lion watching from the window. Everything felt inexplicably intertwined. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a way that both fascinated and terrified her. Her childhood memories of a lion in a distant forest, her lifelong affinity for animals, and now this, a lion bringing a baby to her, a baby with her DNA, were no coincidences. But the questions continued to churn in her mind. How was she connected to this child? Why had the lion chosen her? And why had she forgotten so much of her past? There had to be an explanation, but the truth seemed just out of reach. Her thoughts were interrupted by a low, steady growl from the hospital's courtyard. The sound was distant at first, but as Sarah turned her head toward the window, she saw the lion rise from its resting place beneath the oak tree. It moved with purpose, its majestic body slicing to the evening air, and Sarah felt a strange pull in her chest. She didn't know why, but she had to follow. She didn't pause to think. It was as if something deep inside of her was guiding her steps, urging her forward, and she obeyed without question. As Sarah moved swiftly through the hospital corridors and out into the courtyard, her heart seemed to beat in rhythm with the lion's movements. Outside, the air was cool and carried the scent of fresh grass and earth. The lion stood in front of the oak tree, its golden mane ruffling slightly in the wind, its amber eyes fixed intently on her. The world around her seemed to fade, the sounds of the hospital no longer audible. It was as though she had entered another realm entirely, one where only she and the lion existed. The lion turned its head to face her, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. Its gaze was so powerful that Sarah could hardly look away, and yet she felt no fear. Instead, a profound sense of purpose washed over her, as if everything in her life had been leading to this moment. Without a word, Sarah moved toward the lion, her feet carrying her closer to the tree where the animal had positioned itself. It was as if she had no choice in the matter. She felt drawn to it, compelled by an unseen force. As she approached, the lion's massive form lowered itself slightly, and it nuzzled her gently with its nose. The contact was tender, warm, and surprisingly comforting. It was as though the lion was trying to communicate something deeper, something beyond words. Sarah stood there for a moment, frozen, her heart fluttering. As the lion's breath brushed against her skin, she closed her eyes and memories began to flood back. Memories she hadn't realized she had forgotten. The images came in fragments, as if pieces of a long-lost dream were finally coming together. She saw herself as a young girl, standing at the edge of a vast forest. The trees were tall and ancient, their roots deep in the earth, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. She could hear the rustling of leaves, the quiet calls of animals in the distance, and then there it was, a lion, standing tall and regal among the trees. It was the same lion that stood before her now. Sarah remembered the connection she had felt with the animals of the forest. She had always been drawn to them, felt an unspoken bond with the creatures that roamed the woods. But there was more to it than that. She had felt the forest's heartbeat, as if it were alive with its own soul, its own purpose. The lion had always been there, watching over her. But why had she forgotten? And why, after all these years, had it returned now? The memories felt distant, like fragments of a story half remembered, but they were undeniable. Sarah had once lived in a small village surrounded by dense forests, where the land was sacred and protected. She remembered the elders speaking of ancient traditions, of guardians who watched over both the land and its people. The animals, they had said, were protectors, part of the balance that kept the world in harmony. And then the memory shifted. She was standing with the lion in the clearing, her hand gently resting on its massive head. She could feel its strength, its ancient wisdom, and something else, something deeper, a sense of duty. It was as though she had always known she had a greater purpose, something she had been prepared for, but had never fully understood until now. The soft, persistent voice broke through her thoughts, not through sound, but in her mind. It was a lion's voice, but it wasn't spoken aloud. It came to her in a way that was more than words, an impression, a direct communication between souls. You were chosen to protect the child, the one who will bring balance. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating in a way that left her breathless. For the first time, everything made sense. The lion wasn't just a guardian of the child. It had been guiding her all along, preparing her for something much greater than she had ever imagined. The words lingered in her thoughts, and Sarah could feel the weight of them. Protect the child. But what did it mean for her? What kind of balance was the child meant to bring? And how was she supposed to play a role in this grand, mysterious plan? The lion stepped back, its amber eyes never leaving hers. It was as though it knew the questions racing through her mind, and it was waiting for her to come to her own understanding. Sarah's chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the magnitude of the situation settled in. She wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just an ordinary woman. She was a part of something far greater, something ancient and powerful. And the lion had brought the baby to her for a reason. She was meant to protect it, to guide it. But there was so much she didn't know, so much she had yet to understand. The mystery of her past, the child's origins, the lion's role in all of this. Sarah didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a passive observer. She was a part of something much bigger. And with that realization came an unshakable determination. She would protect the child, no matter the cost. As night fell, Meadowbrook Hospital grew quieter, the bustling sounds of day fading into an eerie stillness. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows down hallways. Sarah stood by the nursery window, gazing out into the darkened sky. The stars twinkled faintly, almost as though they were watching over her as she stood in the silence of the night. The lion had disappeared after their moment in the courtyard, but Sarah could still feel its presence, as if the animal spirit lingered close by. The weight of everything that had happened over the last 24 hours pressed heavily on her heart. She had known for so long that there was something unique about her connection with animals. But now, she realized her life was about to be irrevocably altered. The baby slept peacefully in the crib, its tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic motion, a soft sigh escaping every now and then. The child, she now understood, had a destiny, and she was meant to be part of it. She could feel the profound truth of that, deep in her bones, in her heart. The baby wasn't just any child. It was something more. And so was she. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard footsteps approaching from a hallway. She turned to see a man standing in the doorway. He was older than most of the doctors she had seen, with silver hair and eyes that seemed impossibly wise, eyes that mirrored the same depth as the lion's. He held an air of quiet authority, as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He stepped forward, his presence commanding but calm. "Hello, Nurse Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady, like a wind carrying the weight of centuries. "I am Samuel." Sarah's pulse quickened. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place it. His eyes, though human, seemed to carry a quiet wisdom, as though he knew things that were beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. "I know this may be overwhelming," Samuel continued, his gaze lingering on the baby in the crib, "but there are things you need to understand." He paused, studying Sarah carefully before speaking again. "The child you hold is not of this world, Nurse Sarah. He comes from a lineage that connects humans and animals, beings of ancient blood who are chosen to bridge the gap between our worlds." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected that the baby was no ordinary infant, but this was something she could never have imagined. The realization struck her hard. The lion, the baby, her own inexplicable connection with the animals. It all made sense now. Samuel continued, "The lion you encountered is a sacred protector. Its purpose is to guide and protect those of this bloodline, ensuring that they fulfill their destiny. The lion brought the child to you because you are part of that ancient lineage. You are connected to this child in ways that cannot be explained by science or logic. Sarah stood motionless, her mind struggling to keep up with the revelations unfolding before her. She thought back to the memories she had rediscovered. The distant forest, the lion, her inexplicable bond with nature. She had always felt out of place in the world, as if she didn't truly belong to the human race. But now, the pieces were falling into place. She wasn't just a nurse. She had been chosen for something far greater. Samuel looked at her, his expression both kind and knowing. Your role, Sarah, is to protect the child, to nurture him as he grows. He is meant to bring balance to the world, between humanity and the animal kingdom. There are forces at work, forces that would see this balance disrupted. It is your responsibility to keep the child safe, to ensure that the peace between our worlds remains intact. The weight of his words settled in, but Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt resolve. Deep inside, she had always known that she was meant for something more than the ordinary life she had been living. But now, the truth was undeniable. She was part of something ancient, something powerful. And her life, as she knew it, had just changed forever. But how? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with the enormity of what Samuel had revealed. How do I protect him? What am I supposed to do? Samuel smiled gently, as though he had been waiting for this question. Trust in yourself, Sarah. Trust in your connection to the earth, to the animals. The lion will always be with you, guiding you when needed. You are not alone in this. The child will grow, and you will be there every step of the way, watching over him. But you must also understand that this is a journey. It will not be easy. There will be obstacles, dark forces that seek to control or destroy what the child represents. You will have to be strong, to stand firm in your purpose. But you are ready. His words resonated in Sarah's heart, a quiet echo of truth that only deepened her sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the challenges would be great, but she also knew that she was not alone. The lion's presence would guide her, and now she had a clear understanding of her role in this unfolding destiny. Samuel turned to leave, but before he did, he gave Sarah one final piece of advice. Take care of the child, Nurse Sarah. The world is counting on you. With that, he stepped into the hallway, disappearing into the quiet corridors of the hospital. His words lingered in the air long after he was gone. The world was counting on her. She, Sarah Walters, was not just a nurse anymore. She was a protector, a guardian of a child who held the key to peace and harmony between two worlds. The lion's purpose had been fulfilled. It had brought the child to Sarah, and now the bond was complete. It was up to her to carry out her part of the prophecy. As the night grew darker and the stars twinkled brightly overhead, Sarah stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the sleeping child in the crib. She had always believed that she was meant to do something more, something greater than herself. Now, she knew that she was right. She was not just a nurse. She was a protector, and the journey ahead would be one of both challenges and great importance. The world was counting on her, and she would not fail.